Well, first of all, welcome and thank you for logging into our virtual event. We are going to be talking today about lessons learned from building Australia's fastest growing company. So the fireside chat that you're about to hear is very inspiring. So I hope you get comfortable. Hopefully you have your lunch with you. Bit of housekeeping. We do understand how important it is for you all to have your questions answered. So if you do have questions, please just use the Q&A function. It's the little one at the bottom of the screen that says Q&A with two little chat boxes. Hopefully you've probably been on Zoom enough over the last little bit to recognize what the deal is now. And there will also be a short survey at the end, so it would be great if you could complete that. This just helps us keep focused on the things that are important to you. We have a huge network of amazing people like Nick here, and so we'd like to be able to tap into the right people. So please let us know how we did today, and if you have any requests for next one, then let us know. So we have over 600 registered for this event, and I know you aren't all residents of Stone and Chalk. So for those of you who are new to our virtual space, Stone and Chalk was founded in 2015. We were founded in fintech, but we've now expanded to emerging tech sectors. We are a not-for-profit organization, and our mission is to nurture, connect, and propel those who are seeking to solve the world's most pressing business and social challenges. So in this sense, our founders, corporate and industry partners, investors, and mentors are shaping the future together. We have a proven track record in developing successful growth and support frameworks for founders in the emerging tech sectors. So as I said, we've expanded into emerging sectors, which now include things such as space tech, prop tech, health tech, ag tech, and anything to do with AI, data analytics, and IoT as well. So today we're going to be talking to Nick from Dovetail, and we're going to be talking about Afterpay, as well as a little bit around his journey as well. So Afterpay was one of the biggest success stories of the decade, but did you know that a couple of young Kiwi entrepreneurs actually helped propel it into the $14 billion venture it is today? So we have a lot to cover. So we're going to be talking to Nick Franzen. He's one of the co-founders and managing partners at Dovetail. They're a product development agency, and they have a proven track record for turning ideas into commercially successful digital products that millions of people love to use. So we're really excited to be talking to Nick today. Prior to founding Dovetail, Nick was the co-founder and CTO of One Night. That was a VC-backed ticketing events company, so in my space. And he led the engineering team that grew the platform to handle millions of transactions. They were eventually acquired by Ticket Direct, which was New Zealand's largest ticketing company. And after that, Nick spent a few years in his home country of Denmark, consulting to a range of companies, including Routers, Thomson Reuters, and Geico. Remember the little lizard guy? And my name is Cheryl Mack. I'm the head of community here at Stone and Chalk. My job is to ensure that the programs and services that we provide our residents with support them in their commercialization journey. So we've got 5 pillars: customers, capital, talent, expertise, and community. And yes, I count them off on my fingers every time I do that. And we just, I get to create programs and initiatives across those 5 pillars to help our residents succeed. So if you are interested in learning more about Stone and Chalk, please feel free to reach out. You can grab us at stoneandchalk.com.au or find me on LinkedIn and just reach out. So let's go on to Nick. You can stop listening to me. Nick, tell us a bit more about what you were doing before Dovetail.
Thanks, Cheryl, for that introduction, and great to be here. So before Dovetail, I started my first technology company with the same co-founder, actually, that I'm currently, that we started Dovetail with. I was studying economics and computer science in my last year of university, and we raised a reasonably significant amount of money, and our idea was to build essentially a Groupon clone. There was no Groupon in New Zealand, and this was growing really quickly overseas, and this just seemed like there's no way this couldn't work in New Zealand. But we saw a couple of issues with the kind of standard Groupon. Predominantly, it was kind of paper-based. So first you had to have a printer, and no students had printers, and if they had printers, they didn't have any ink. And it was also kind of embarrassing. Who was going to go out with their friends or on a date, and then at the end of the date you pull out your Groupon voucher? So we created this technology where you could essentially buy prepaid deals, whether that was restaurants, cafes, whatever it was. But the deals, instead of having to print out a piece of paper. They would be stored on a credit card and essentially stored in the FPOS system. So that means that you could still buy the cheap deal, but you could go and spend it without anyone knowing that you'd actually used a special voucher. So this seemed like a better way to do it. And then about 2 weeks before we launched, Groupon came into New Zealand. Another company called Grab One, which was a sort of a combination of the big media companies in New Zealand, came in. A couple of smaller players came in. So it went from like no competition to just everyone was in there at once. And we ended up actually pivoting. We just thought that was a fight we didn't really want to get into at that stage with these really well capitalized players. So we decided to focus more on the music industry, on the festival industry, and basically anything to do with nightlife, ticketing, festivals. And we created a company in that field where we were doing most of the music events in New Zealand, most of the music festivals, and it was quite stressful. But it was a lot of fun as well. You know, we were young, and we built that up, and eventually sold it, and went overseas and started thinking about what was our next thing that we wanted to do. And that's when we were kind of thinking about the idea for. We wanted something that we could really spend the next 30 years working on, something we would never get bored of, and something that was kind of anti-fragile, something that had diversification and we're all we're not in one basket. And we started coming up with this idea for Dovetail. So yeah, which really kind of mixed our main interests, which were entrepreneurship and investment. And that's how we got started.
That's awesome. So because we're talking today about, different support relationships, I guess, it would be great to understand what level of support you received for your business, whether that was legal, consultants, accountants, or development agencies.
Yeah, sure. We had two really important advisors, especially in the early days. One of them, they were actually both investors in our first company. One of them was a general partner in the venture capital firm Movac in New Zealand. Movac was really the sort of first real VC firm in New Zealand, and they made some big investments. The other person was someone that had been the CEO and grown a kind of a development agency to a bit over 100 people before he exited. And they helped us a lot, kind of avoid some early mistakes. And we would hire a house somewhere. We'd go away on these retreats together, and we'd spend a whole weekend just talking, drawing things on the whiteboard, drinking quite a lot of whiskey, and through this process, I think we were able to kind of shortcut. We were able to avoid a lot of mistakes. We were able to kind of learn from their mistakes. And I think one thing that we've found has been really helpful with advisors is to find advisors that have like relevant industry experience. There's tons of good books on how to start businesses. There's tons of good blogs and YouTube. But if you can find someone that's really started a similar type of business in your industry, preferably in your location, they can give you a kind of a tactical edge and help you sort of avoid some mistakes. And that kind of info is just otherwise pretty hard to come by. So that was hugely helpful. And they also introduced us to a bunch of really good sort of legal and financial advisors we're spending a surprisingly large amount on lawyers these days. So yeah, we've got the right ones.
Awesome. So tell me about the inception of Dovetail.
Well, really, we wanted to kind of bring together a lot of the really good people we'd work with in the kind of startup world, I guess. I think there's a subtle difference. You learn something from being thrown in the trenches of a startup, right? It's a sort of stressful, high pressure environment. You have to take more responsibility than you're probably allowed in most other companies. So we wanted to really create a company that had a lot of entrepreneurial talent that weren't just interested in the technology side, but that, you know, had been co-founders of startups, that had been CTOs of startups. And so if we look at our first many hires, and even today, they were really people we'd worked with as part of growing our first company. Yeah.
And so I guess what we're here today to talk about is your relationship with Afterpay. So how did that come about?
Yeah, so I had studied with one of the early employees in Afterpay. And at a certain point, she called me and asked if we could come in and have a chat. And this was back in late 2016 or early 2017. And they were a much smaller company at the time. But at the time, they didn't have a mobile product at all, for example. You could use Afterpay online, and they had some merchants, and they were starting to get some traction on the customer side. But it was a much smaller company. And the first thing we came in to help them with was really building a mobile product. And the really important part of that was that with the mobile app, it opened up the ability to do Afterpay in-store. So whereas before you could only buy online, now with the mobile product, you could both use Afterpay online, but you could also go into a shop and actually use Afterpay. So we, started designing this and building this, and it was a really quick. They had a ludicrously quick timeline of when to get this out, and we sort of managed to hit that. And we wanted to just do a bit of a soft launch, like not make too big of a deal about it initially, but it kind of quite quickly spread on Facebook, and within 48 hours, it was the number one, app in the country on the App Store, and it just sort of really took off. And over time, it's become an incredibly important part of the app is just used so much. So that was a great start to that relationship. That's exactly the type of first project you want. And then a little bit later, but just obviously with the mobile app, it's never a finished product. So you're always continuously working on it, improving it, releasing new features. As Afterpay continued to grow, they actually, their website was starting to feel a little bit of the pressure just of all the growth that was happening. And it was sort of quite clear that, there were some different options for how to solve this. But there's always risk in doing that. And we felt that we had a solution that could really kind of solve this problem for them. We felt that we had a solution where we could rebuild, the consumer-facing web platform and the technology and infrastructure stack that would kind of really allow them to scale for a long time and would still be really easy to develop, add new features, kind of move quickly. And we also had a meeting with them, I think like started next week. So basically what we did, we created like a little team in Dovetail that just worked basically 24 hours a day. And we worked on building a prototype for how we could basically rebuild this consumer web platform and kind of and create it in a way that was just really scalable and could handle a lot of traffic. And we just stayed up all night drinking Red Bulls, programming, and we'd kind of do it in shifts. And then the meeting we had that started the next week, I just remember going into it, I was completely exhausted. But we sort of walked into the meeting room and we plugged in our laptops, and then I think we went to a website, which was like the new Afterpay website.com or something. And then we basically demoed the work that we'd done in secret and kind of explained what we'd done and how this could be used, how this was a pretty good option moving forward. And much to their credit, they just kind of laughed and was like, we're just shaking their heads, and we're like, okay, guys, well, let's look into doing this. So that was kind of the start of how we became a bigger part of taking over of kind of working with them on the web development side of their business. And since then, we've worked together on designing and building and maintaining what has now become, a shopping destination in itself. So I think a lot of people don't know this, but Afterpay is now the second largest referrer of traffic in Australia. It's only Google that refers more traffic than Afterpay. So
Wow.
being on that Afterpay front page, it's just an incredible driver of traffic, and they're just continuing to improve that shopping destination experience. So that's been really exciting. And then the next kind of stage of that has also been, obviously when we started working with them, they were just in Australia. They then expanded into New Zealand, which that kind of brings technical complexity to operate in multiple countries. But the big kind of interesting challenge was always kind of the US, which is where they went next. And again, that brings more complexity. But it was always sort of it's just been amazing to see how well they've done in the US, and how the kind of same growth that they had in Australia, that's really continuing in the US. I mean, they haven't been there for that long, and I don't know what the latest figures are, but last time I saw they had over 5 million active users in the US. They got over 50,000 merchants internationally. They've also started growing into the UK. So we've been working with them ever since we started. So it's been a really kind of fun, interesting journey to be on, to kind of see the growth of the company. So I think it's around $19-20 billion or something. We can never quite keep up. We did a case study and it keeps going out of date, so we're having to spend far too much time updating that. But it's been a really fun journey, and it's been exciting.
What about some of the features that you guys implemented in the early days that you think contributed to that rapid growth?
I think, there's obviously multiple paths to this. One thing I think Afterpay has done really well is create a tight product that works really well, and it's kind of simple, that has a high degree of polish. Now there's some competitors, and they kind of, some of them are like, kind of shamelessly copying Afterpay, because it kind of just seems like, well, okay, that's how you solve this problem. Like, that wasn't obvious when Afterpay started. They've just managed to kind of, I think they were good at avoiding all of the features that could be built and building the core ones really well. And then of course there was also a lot of stuff that happened outside of the actual product. So if we look at different ways that companies can kind of, achieve growth, I think a lot of them can be kind of like grouped in 3 categories. You have your kind of product-based strategies. I think some of the really famous ones are still kind of the most, illuminating. I'm not sure if you remember back in the old Hotmail day, for example. If you sent an email, it had a little signature at the bottom that says, "P.S. I love you. Get your free email from Hotmail." Strategies like that essentially turn your customers in, that make your customers essentially do marketing on your behalf, can be hugely powerful. Dropbox did something where they essentially turned their customers into sales reps for them by a really strong referral scheme, where if you referred a friend, then you got a certain amount of free storage space, which is a really cheap way for them to acquire new customers, and it's also great for the person doing the referral. And then the other parts are obviously, sales and marketing and things like direct sales. I think what's really interesting with Afterpays, they don't fit the traditional model of how most companies are kind of acquiring customers. Most companies are either, marketing driven, marketing and PR driven. Think of something like Spotify or maybe Uber. They're investing heavily into marketing, to PR, getting their brand out there. Then you have, kind of more like enterprise companies, Salesforce. Their sales, their growth is really driven by direct sales. And it's kind of what's right for a particular company. It really depends on what they're kind of selling. So I think an interesting question is why is enterprise software so expensive to buy? And I think something that's not as understood as it should be is I think one of the main reasons is that enterprise software is incredibly expensive to sell. If you think about something like Salesforce, you probably have a team of people selling this, of direct salespeople selling this. They might work for a long period of time trying to close a deal. Many of the deals they're trying to close might not close. So if you just think about how expensive it is to acquire one customer, it's hugely expensive, and therefore they have to charge a lot for their product. And that kind of coming back to Afterpay, what is it that Afterpay has like, why have they been able to grow so quickly? And I think it's because they've been able to, one of the things that's special about Afterpay is that they're able to acquire a lot of customers really cheaply through essentially indirect customer acquisition or indirect marketing. So they don't spend a fortune on traditional marketing. They don't have a team calling up you and I asking us if we know about Afterpay and want to use it, because that would be super expensive. But they've got they have a really strong direct sales team that's able to go out there and sign up really large merchants. And when that happens, Afterpay becomes a part of the checkout process for those merchants. And they then get exposure to the millions of customers that merchant has. So that's just an incredibly powerful mechanism for growth. Think about most direct sales. Most direct sales, when a sales rep makes a sale, they increase the customer count by 1. If Afterpay brings in a really, really large, like say a large American retailer with millions of users, that might result in hundreds of thousands of new users for Afterpay. So that kind of means that they can, there's a strategy there for acquiring customers at scale that's actually has really good unit economics and has really low customer acquisition costs. And it's a win-win. The merchant wants Afterpay to be part of their checkout process. They even want to tell their users to use Afterpay because Afterpay increases their sales. So the merchant is increasing their sales. Afterpay is acquiring a lot of customers at a cheap rate. So it's a great win-win, and I think it's a really important factor behind Afterpay's kind of rapid growth.
And you mentioned around how they were able to penetrate different markets internationally. I'd love to hear a bit more about what strategies they used and how they were successful at doing that.
Yeah, sure. So I think without even having to go into too many details about Afterpay specific, it's a problem that we see a lot with companies that are new founders that are approaching Dovetail or other companies. There are a lot of ideas that would work really well at scale, but that don't have a strong value proposition for the first 10, 50, 100, first 1,000 users. They really only work at scale. And if they don't work, if the idea doesn't really work when the company's small, when it hasn't yet achieved scale, it's really hard to actually ever get to the point where you have the scale and this becomes a great product. So it's not that this can't be solved. Companies like eBay and Airbnb, like they had similar problems and it can be solved, but it's a really difficult thing to solve. If you think about Afterpay on the other hand, Afterpay has a really strong value proposition from the very first customer and the very first merchant. If you're on, say, a retailer's site and you want to buy something, and then you find out that you can buy it interest free, spread it out over 4 payments. I mean, that in itself is great. You don't really care how many other customers they have. You don't really care if they've got other merchants at that stage, because you know what you want to buy. You want to buy it from this merchant. So if they have more merchants, that's just an added bonus. But Afterpay is an example of a company where the value proposition is really strong from day one. And that's, I think, another thing those are the types of companies that are they're brilliant, right? Because they don't have that problem of only working at scale. When it comes to things like credibility, Afterpay had, some really talented and strong, operators behind it. So no doubt that helped them in the early days. But I think, the fact that their value proposition was so strong in the early days has been super important. And we see with some of the other companies that we work with, from a credibility perspective, I mean, it's really important to get your first couple of logos, especially if you are selling B2B. Credibility kind of matters. It doesn't matter as much as if you're selling online. I mean, we've probably all bought something that was shipped out of someone's basement and no one really cares. But if you're selling B2B, it's more important. And there we just kind of see, it's just a situation where you've got to get a bit creative and you've got to hustle. And we see founders, going to big companies, usually through networks, offering to bring them on board for free, offering to build them special stuff, but doing whatever they need to do to get their first 2 or 3, impressive case studies, and then use that as a springboard to really grow from there. And that seems to work.
Yeah, that's awesome. So we have a question here from our audience. What do you think made Afterpay go straight to an outsourced solution with you guys rather than building an in-house team?
Afterpay were really good at, I think they were really good at using partners when they needed to. So we weren't the only partner they had. They also partnered, for example, with Touch Corp, based out of Melbourne. And so if you look at the 2 founders, both of them are non-technical. Both of them had a lot of success before Afterpay. And they really just wanted to find partners that were really good at their particular, area. And so they could focus on the things that they were incredible at. So if you look at how we came into Afterpay in the beginning, it was really because, the way we came in was because of mobile. Afterpay didn't have a mobile product at that stage, and they wanted to launch something that was, world class. They wanted to do it quite quickly. And at that stage, you have an option of either trying to build a team, a high-performing team, and whereas the approach that they did was basically find a partner, like us. We built a really great product for them. It allowed them to kind of get into market quickly with a mobile app, and then over time, as that product became really successful, they were then able to start, bringing some of their own people into it. So, now we work in kind of a hybrid fashion where it's both Afterpay and Dovetail people that are working on the mobile product. And they kind of get the best of both worlds. We're all sitting in the same Slack rooms working together. So I think that was a really, obvious way for them to go, actually. It was a low risk way for them to get a quality product into market quickly. And they always had the option of taking the product back or kind of meeting in the middle, which is what they've done in this hybrid model that we currently have going on.
That's awesome. So I guess for other companies that are looking to do this, when do you think it makes sense to partner, and when does it make sense not to partner?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. There's definitely, it is easier to do by example, but I think there's certainly some cases where it doesn't make sense to partner. If we're thinking about new companies, I think if you have a small team of really gifted technical co-founders that are strong technically and they have no qualms about their ability to deliver this product, to grow a team, I don't think it makes sense to outsource. One of the benefits of outsourcing is you kind of reduce the risk that technology will become a limiting factor of your success. But if you have a rock star team, then you probably got that covered. If you have a really small budget, partnering is unlikely to be a solution that you should really consider. Hiring probably isn't a great solution either because you haven't got any money. So, in that situation, you've really got to, I think, either raise some money or find a great non-technical co-founder that can kind of help you get there. But I think if, regardless of whether you're building it in-house or partnering, the important thing is that you have sort of really great people that are closely aligned with your company. And I think this is where historically the kind of traditional agency model has been really broken. If you look at things like, there's multiple reasons for this, but look at something like fixed price contracts, which is still quite common. That completely sets up a project for failure from day one on so many levels. It essentially forces you into a waterfall situation where you're now trying to create a fast growing modern startup, but you're doing it in waterfall. And the reason it has to be waterfall is because for the agency to have a shot at trying to estimate how much this is going to cost, they kind of really need to follow a waterfall model to have even a chance. And the other thing it does is it creates this kind of inherent conflict where the agency is kind of incentivized to keep costs down, to kind of reduce the amount of polish. The client is kind of incentivized to squeeze new features in there to kind of get a higher level of polish than was agreed on, because that's kind of free for them. So it just creates this kind of tension where there's a sort of zero-sum game. And I think that's really detrimental to having a long-term relationship. You want a partner that you can go with, you can go on a 3, 4, 5 year journey, and that kind of that model really breaks it. Another thing I guess, so if you're looking to partner, you need to find someone that has a model that kind of aligns you. The thing we've seen work really well, the thing that the way that we work is essentially something more like a retainer model where the client buys a certain amount of hours a month, which is then spread across a dedicated, a team with some people are dedicated. You don't want developers context switching. And then other people like designers and product managers and growth hackers, they might be dedicated or they might be half-time depending on what the client needs. And then kind of mixing that with short termination periods so that you're not locked into a long fixed price build. You have to impress them every single month. Otherwise they can let you go. It kind of creates like quite a lot of pressure, but it creates a really good incentive. The other place the other thing that's kind of broken with a traditional model is it can be hard for agencies to hire good people in what's a really competitive labor market. If you sort of think of, if you're a really great engineer or designer, why would you go work in an agency when you can go work at a product company and get a salary and also an options package? So, from day one, what made Dovetail different and what really was the reason we set up the company was that we created Dovetail Ventures, which actually invests into our clients. We make reasonably large investments into our clients, and that the shares that we get as part of that, we share with every person in the Dovetail team so that everyone has, they get both a salary and options. And that just completely changes how we're aligned with customers and our ability to hire people. So if you're partnering, you just need to make sure that you have the right incentives in place. With an in-house team, you already have the right incentives in place. It's relatively easy to fire someone. So you've got short termination periods. You've also generally got ESOPs in the tech world. So you also have alignment. With agencies, traditionally, you haven't had the same alignment on both those things, but that's starting to change now.
So speaking of Dovetail Ventures, what are the criterias, or what do you look for when you are choosing which companies to invest in?
Yeah, we have a relatively long sort of investment framework, but we're looking actually for many of the same things that most good VCs are looking for. We're looking for, we're looking for really strong founders. That just, it matters so much. We're looking for ideas that where there's a clear path of how they could work at every size. We want companies that could work well when they're small, when they're medium-sized, and when they're large. That's just a really common problem we see with companies of getting over that bump. And so we're wanting the companies that really work well at all stages. One of the things that we really love is when we get non-technical co-founders come to us and explain some kind of problem that they've seen in their industry, and it's some problem we didn't even know existed. We barely knew that the industry existed, and it turns out that this is a really big problem. We know that there's very few sort of young computer science graduates that are looking at this problem, so it doesn't have much competition, it has a large market, and it's kind of something that's a little bit niche. That's always exciting. So yeah, we're looking for those types of things. It's many of the same things that a traditional VC is looking for, to be honest.
Yeah. And has COVID and I guess the dip in the economy, has that had an impact on you guys? And will that have an impact on, I guess, the investments that you make or the type of companies that you choose?
We've been really fortunate that it hasn't had an impact on us. The companies that we work with are quite well capitalized, and we've got long running partnerships with them. So it hasn't affected us, at least not yet. We are seeing that it is harder to raise for new companies to raise money right now than it was just before COVID. Although I think it was quite easy just before COVID. So, but it is a little bit harder now. It hasn't changed. I don't think it's going to change the way that we operate too much at this stage. Although what I guess is a little bit scary for everyone is that we haven't quite seen how this will kind of affect the economy. There's been a lot of stimulus from governments. It's really kind of what happens over the next 12 months. Does this turn into a protracted recession, or can we somehow get through this without that? So we're maybe being slightly more cautious than we were before, but it hasn't changed us too much.
That's good to hear. And do you get venture capitalists involved at all? Like, do you work with any of the VCs?
Yeah, so we work with, if we look at the Dovetail venture portfolio, the companies we have in there are all VC backed. And we will work with different VCs, basically in each one. And those companies, we generally come in as seed stage money, and then we might follow on to the VC stage, but that's really where it makes so much sense to partner up with some really good VCs. Dovetail itself, we actually don't have VC investment in Dovetail itself, but for all the companies in the ventures portfolio, we certainly do.
We have a question here from someone in the audience. What does a strong founder look like?
Yeah, like someone you'd love to hire and have in your firm. Yeah, it's interesting. I like founders that are smart, that have had success early and in different parts of their life, that have some kind of X factor, that that they could, when you're sitting with a founder, myself included, that they're going to be facing all of these problems which they have no idea to solve. And it's really, will they have the perseverance, the intelligence, the tenacity to solve those? I think what's really important as well is actually social skills. Will they be able to build a really strong team around them? Will they be able to attract the right people? And will they be able to build a culture that's going to keep attracting people? Like one of the most important things that founders need to do is really the ability to kind of surround themselves by brilliant people that are completely aligned. So if you have a founder that's really smart, but you're like, who's going to come work with this person? That's a massive red flag. But if you can kind of see that they're pulling in brilliant people left, right, and center that want to join them on this journey, that's hugely valuable. I think often, statistically, often second-time founders are actually more likely to be successful. But then we also do see a lot of first-time founders that have done really well. So it's hard to kind of quantify exactly. These are like the 13 criteria. But it's, I think if you meet enough of them, you start to get a bit of a feeling for it.
Fair enough. We've got some questions from the audience here, so I might just run through some more of these. How do you think that Afterpay will be able to stay ahead of the many competitors in this space?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean, Afterpay has been one of the fastest growing companies in the world, over the last 3 years. The ability to execute has been sort of second to none. I keep thinking about Afterpay that for them to continue like this is going to, they're going to have to knock it out of the park, and they keep doing that. So, we will see. And obviously, I'm not privy to some of the things that are in their long-term goals, and there's other things that I can't share. So I can't get into too much detail on that, unfortunately. But there's, I think there's an exciting future ahead of it.
When you're moving really quickly and you're I guess growing that quickly, how do you validate with customers?
I think a really important part of this is from the earliest stages of a new startup, for example. Like, you really want to, ideally, you should be an industry expert in the industry you're going into. I think this is actually sometimes where non-technical co-founders have a little bit of an edge, because they usually are industry experts. What they are lacking is the technical know-how of how do I build a software company. But they know so much about the industry they're going into. Whereas sometimes you see technical co-founders that are great at building software, but they know less about the industry that they're going into. They're kind of looking for a problem. But yeah, it's hugely important to really understand the industry inside out, to start talking with customers really early. And I think what's really valuable is actually just to start selling. If you go and talk to customers about, like, would you use this product, for example? I mean, people are nice. They're going to say yes. But if you go to the same person or another person that's similar and, try to get them to take out their credit card and pay you money to use your product, that's when you start getting true feedback. That's when they'll tell you what they really think. And you can do this really early in the process. Start getting letters of intent, start trying to see if you can make a sale, offer them 90% off, do whatever you need to, but you can start essentially selling really, really early in the process. And I think that's one of the ways to get the truest feedback that you can possibly get. And I think it's also actually quite often really helpful to have the founders be part of that in the beginning, just because the feedback is so important. It's not just about the revenue, it's about the feedback. And also, if you can get some clients, some good clients onto the product really early, you'll get even more feedback when they actually start using it. And they'll probably use it in slightly different ways than you had imagined. So yeah, start selling.
So we have another question here. What do you think are the key things that contributed to your success?
I think two things. The fact that we have a model that aligns us really well with the customer. The fact that we have Dovetail Ventures where we actually are investing into our clients. Our success is tied with their success. And right from us to the client, and from us and the whole team, it creates a completely different dynamic, right? So I think that is absolutely vital That's one thing that really sets us apart. I think we've also created a great culture, and essentially a company is its people, and the kind of the people we've managed to attract into the company is a huge reason for the success we've been able to have. And there's kind of, I think some of the success is kind of self-reinforcing. Because of the model we have, we could sometimes be a little bit picky with what projects we actually take on. And that allows us to have that's allowed us to have some quite good projects come through Dovetail. And then those projects kind of is this feedback loop where by being able to be more picky, you get involved with better projects, that therefore then more people want to work with you. So yeah, I think, but no doubt, Dovetail Ventures has been a hugely important part of Dovetail's success.
We have a question from a developer on the developer side. So if you're a technical co-founder partnering with a non-technical co-founder, how long should you give them, I guess, until they monetize or raise capital in general? I guess they're thinking in terms of like burning out and just building something that might not be successful.
Yeah. I think it's hard to give advice on because it's so context specific, right? How much does a non-technical founder have to work with? How good is the product that presumably he or she is trying to sell? How many times have you guys pivoted? And is it the right time right now to be raising capital? Do you have a product market fit? Do you need more capital? So, I mean, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn, but it's just a slightly difficult question to answer without knowing any of the context behind this particular situation.
Yeah, that's fair enough. What about your client mix now? How has the growth of Afterpay, like, have they dominated your time, or are they like an anchor client? How many clients do you take on at one time? Yeah,
so we have a sort of, I guess, diversified portfolio of clients. Afterpay is a big client for sure. We're also starting to see some traction in the US, which is really interesting for us. A lot of our work is in fintech. Although one of the things we're starting to do now as well is actually invest into companies that are sort of social good companies, but are also like for-profit businesses. I think if you can mix those two, it's a really interesting thing to be working on, because you can kind of both do good, and if it's for profit, you can also use VC investment. You can kind of really leverage the good that you can do. But yeah, I think we're working on about 10 projects, and the US was really just before COVID came out, which is unfortunate now because the US has obviously been hit pretty hard. But we're starting to see some really big projects coming out of there, and Australasia is actually really competitive when you're supplying into the US because of the exchange rates. So yeah, that was going to be the big goal from end of this year, early next year, but we'll have to see what happens.
Fair enough. And you talked about like founders coming to you with niche products or industries earlier. Could you provide an example of that?
Yeah, sure. We had two founders come to us, for example, that they had been working. One of them had been working with the government as a consultant. He's a lawyer by background, on setting up the NDIS scheme for Australia, and working on ways that they could build a platform that could help make this process easier for parents, that have maybe have children in the scheme or are in the scheme, because there's actually quite a lot of support available for people in Australia with disabilities, but obviously the improvements could be made in how you access that capital, how you spent it, how you budgeted it, kind of having someone there that could really have your back. And, you know, there was a small industry of, or it wasn't actually small, it was an industry of what they call plan managers, for example, but it was a kind of very traditional industry. And so we had these two founders. One of them was the lawyer that had worked as a consultant for the government setting this up. The other was, you know, someone that had worked in finance, essentially raising capital. Both really smart, both charismatic, and had a great relationship with each other. And they really cared. You know, they both had family members that were actually in the NDIS scheme. So it wasn't just about, you know, they really cared about what they were building. And I had heard of the NDAs, but, you know, I didn't really know much about it. And then when you start looking into it, you know, you realize this is an enormous industry. So that's the kind of thing, you know, we're invested in that company. It's doing really well. That's the thing that's really exciting for us. To give you another example, we had two founders that had started some previous businesses in New Zealand, actually, that I had heard of these businesses. And they were looking at ways to replace the world's, you know, plastic packaging with essentially plastic packaging that just disappears in your compost. You know, it's completely recyclable. And again, you know, I knew packaging was actually quite a big industry because, but I didn't know I didn't know very much about that industry. And so when you start working with these founders in new areas and see that their ability to kind of scale out and see some of the early traction, which both of these companies had, you know, before they even had a website, they had customers, they had orders, they were shipping product, and they didn't even have anything yet. That's when you kind of know, okay, like there's some real demand here. And also that these people are hustlers. They're going to get this done. So yeah, that's two examples.
Awesome. Thank you. Those are great examples. What about for those who are non-technical and are looking for a technical co-founder? I know this is generally tricky to answer. I get this question all the time as well, but what are your tips for connecting with the right person?
Yeah, that is super hard. And to be honest, I know there's like websites around where you can do this but I think we're like just looking around, most people have co-founders that they've either met in university or that they've worked with in various jobs. And you know, having a co-founder, I've always had co-founders, and I think it's a really rewarding thing to go through the process with someone you really trust and respect. But it's also the person you're going to spend the most time with for the next 10 years. So it needs to be the right person, right? I think university is a great place to meet them, you know, places where you're working. I met my co-founder at high school. We were really into the stock market and at the time, and we were actually backtesting various strategies. I thought I was going to end up in finance. So we were collecting lots of data, backtesting strategies for the stock market, trying to create systems that could explore various kind of correlations. And he was doing the same thing. So we started working on this together, you know, I think age 16, and started trying to teach ourselves how to program in that process. And so it was just kind of natural, you know, at this stage we've worked together for so long. And I think if you're working with someone you've known for a long time as well, it can be quite a lot easier. But yeah, I strongly recommend if you're thinking about it to get a co-founder, but it does need to be the right person.
Awesome. So we're coming to the end of our chat here today. So I'm going to ask one more audience question, and then I have one final question for you. So what is your advice for creating the best possible culture at your company?
You need to invest into it. Like seriously invest into it. It's not going to happen by itself. And you need to make sure that the people that you bring into the company, it's really important, especially in the beginning, the first 10 people you bring into the company, they're going to just play such a massive role in defining the culture of that company. So sometimes you have to say no to people that are brilliant. If you just don't think that their personality is going to be a a positive contributor to your culture. So we, this is something we care a lot about, and then also we will invest into it, and that can actually be expensive, but I think it's usually worth it. To kind of give an example, every year we take everyone, like the whole team, everyone's wives and husbands and kids, and like just the whole family. We travel somewhere, and we spend time together. We've done this to Indonesia before. We've gone on surf trips together, where we will both do a bit of work on kind of strategy and the future of the company, and just hang out. And we've done it in skiing in Queenstown. We've even gone to Costa Rica. So, just taking the whole company and everyone's family, taking everyone away and investing into that it does a lot for culture. And so yeah, it's not something that's going to happen by itself, but it's definitely worth it. I think it just from the people that you can attract and especially retention, it's important.
Awesome. And final question, for early stage founders that are just starting up, what's your best advice?
To not underestimate sales and marketing. Really make sure you start doing that early. Make sure that, we all have kind of heard the folly around if you build it, they will come, and how that isn't always the case, or how it isn't usually the case. But if you look at a lot of, especially new startups that are maybe going into accelerators, a lot of them are still entirely, they're still technical. A lot of them don't have someone that really is a great salesperson, or that really enjoys the process of selling or marketing. It's sometimes seen as a bit of an afterthought. And it's just an unfortunate part of doing business, that if you're not selling and marketing your product, then it doesn't really matter in many cases how good it is. You need to do both. So just make sure you don't underestimate that part of the business. Yeah, I think that's hugely important.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for your time today, Nick. And thank you to everyone who has joined us.